2. Resignation and renunciation. His experiences at home were supplemented by those awaiting Spinoza from without. They might have been mingled with them, but his fate manifestly prescribed a simple, straightforward line and course for this wonderful intellect. What he thought, sought, and from without secular knowledge and learning, could come to him only through the knowledge of Latin. Therefore, after a short interval with a German private tutor, he became the pupil of the best Latinist of the city. Franciscus was van den Ende. This man was his complete opposite, Catholic by birth, in his youth a monk. His passionate soul drove him from the Augustines to the Jesuits, who strove by their weapons of discipline to recapture life for Catholicism by affirming life and penetrating it with their doctrine. But Van de Ende was too deeply permeated with the urge of the time to embrace the Jesuit world structure calmly. The pantheistic force, this seeking after the universal, forced him from Leiden to Amsterdam, where he maintained himself and a numerous family as a teacher of Latin. The Jesuits had taught him delight in the theater, but what he produced were the comedies of Terence, and through them blows a pagan breath of the true spirit of antiquity. No wonder that in Orthodox Calvinist Amsterdam, his life was a failure. As an elderly man, he emigrated to Paris and, bursting with pent-up energy, took up the practice of medicine again. But in the firmly established Baroque of Louis XIV, he would employ his talents nowhere. An eternal rebel, he was finally involved 2 years after the death of his pupil Spinoza in a revolt of the nobility and ended on the gallows. In his house, his pupils, as soon as they had to some extent mastered the language of classical thinking and contemporary learning, met with the influence of Giordano Bruno, of Hobbes, and of the greatest thinkers of the time. René Descartes. Beyond this, Spinoza suffered the trial and temptation of winning a woman's love. He was a slender, olive-brown complexioned, well-dressed youth with a cheerful but timid nature. Van den Ende daughters, Sierra Maria, frail of body, but gifted with a brilliant intellect, assisted the father with his lessons. She was a child 11 or 12, but of great maturity of mind. She had to be childlike to make an impression upon Spinoza's timid soul, which rejected the adult world. Even in later years, a friend reports he spoke of her with great affection. He wanted to marry her, but he had fellow pupils who were his friends, and the courtship of the most gifted of them won Clara Maria's fancy. This man, a physician and a German, well-to-do and worldly-wise, carried her off to his native Hamburg and out of Spinoza's life. That this union turned out to be very unhappy and ended in serious discord can surprise no one. But thereupon Spinoza withdrew even this part of his spiritual and human powers from outward life. Intellectualization alone was now his road and his opportunity, his passion and his nobility. The man Spinoza, who ate and drank, would always retain a virginal youthfulness. Like a boy, he would take pleasure in starting fights between spiders or throwing flies into their webs. Playing with his skill in drawing, he would portray himself as Masaniello, thus betraying the fancy of breaking out from concealed rebellion and guarded silence into open and passionate action. Because Masaniello, we know from the mute of Portisi was the young fisherman who led the people of his native Naples against the Spanish viceroy, the common enemy, and so met his tragic end. Later, long after Spinoza had exchanged his first name, Baruch, for its Latin equivalent, Benedictus, and had grown accustomed to permanent poverty. He lived among the people of the lower classes, plainly dressed, simple, and undemanding like those people, smoking his pipe and conversing with them to rest his mind, and living quietly in retirement in a small room which differed from those of his landlord only in a number of books, a small library. Once only did he attempt to come fervently and demonstratively out into the open to protest against murderous and ignorant barbarism and violence. That was in the summer of 1672, when he had long lived at The Hague. Armed mobs of the party of Orange assimilated the brothers of DeWitt, of whom Jam, the elder stadtholder, patrician, and friend of the intellect and of the sciences, was one of the most important statesmen of his time. To express his outraged protest against the slaying of this great innocent friend, he wrote the words, Ultimi Barbarium, worst of savages, upon a sheet of paper to post on a wall the following night near the scene of the crime. But his landlord prevented him, and finally the tears of the philosophic man were victorious over the indignation. Spinoza did not go out on the street again. He was a man of pronounced Jewish and aristocratic appearance. His well-formed, slender figure displayed a long head, lean, with curved nose, arched eyebrows, a wide, thin-lipped mouth with protruding lower lip, and, below a high forehead, great black eyes with a melancholy sparkle. He was usually portrayed with black preacher's locks, and in later years, his black habit with white bib emphasized this clerical note, but there exists also an early portrait which gives him the features of Sephardic grandee, altogether alien and aristocratic, with almost short hair, a small mustache, and a sea captain's beard from ear to ear, leaving the upper part of the chin and cheeks exposed. Unfortunately, this portrait is not authenticated, and yet it represents a man of greater individuality than the authentic preachers' portraits with their long, beautifully waved locks, and it singularly accords best with Spinoza's origin as well as his life work. The preacher's habit, though, would explain much that is inherent in his writings: the dogmatism, the excess of theology, a certain dialectic dryness in abstractions and in his prose style, which, however, may go back to the translators whom we have to follow, for like a preacher he wrote exclusively in Latin.